Thank you, Grant, for interviewing me and talking to me about my research. For me, the whole field of ufology follows a timeline, and it also is a geopolitical situation because everything that happened because of events on planet Earth. I always make a joke and say, well, the ETs didn't come to Earth because they were on vacation.
Yep.
So what I'm doing is I have two particular things I want to talk about in this particular interview.
Okay.
Number one, my research on the 1945 San Antonio crash, San Antonio, New Mexico. I have been to San Antonio, New Mexico at least 10 times. It was all a coincidence. I was in Italy, and I read an article about two little Hispanic boys in 1945 that had seen not only the crash, they watched it, but they also saw the beings. It's very much like the Lonnie Zamora case where he saw the beings come out. And by the way, San Antonio is about 13 miles or 10 miles from Socorro. So even though the Lonnie Zamora case is later. So I thought, when I was in Italy, oh my God, there's such detail here. Why isn't everybody just going there and talking to these guys while they're still alive? Because if it was 1945, and that's the year I was born, they were in their 70s. They're in their 70s, and you got to get these people while they're alive. Little did I know it would be me doing this story. And little did I know I would be doing this story around 2014. Just by coincidence, somebody came and wrote to me about their father being a pilot at the last crash and why I should get hold of Remy Baca and Jose Padilla. And then when I asked who those were the two little boys. Jose Padilla's father rented 180,000 acres from the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, 1945. So Jose was 9 years old, and Remy was his best friend. And the two boys would ride horses about 13 miles from the Trinity site where the first atomic bomb was tested. What I didn't realize when I started to do the story, Grant, was that the town did not know about the testing of the bomb. When I finally did talk to both Jose Padilla and Remy Baca, who has now passed on, was that they told me that the morning that happened on July 16, 1945, in the case of Remy Baca, of Jose Padilla, his mom opened the door when she heard this explosion. She said it was around 4:35 in the morning, and she was blinded in one eye. Baca did not know. And Remy remembers the explosion because his bed went from one side of the room to the other.
Wasn't he injured too?
Pardon?
Was he not injured as well?
No, because what happened there was the vibration, because it was 13 miles away from where all this was going on. The vibration moved the bed. In the case of Jose's mom, she actually opened the door to see what it was. She said, like, the sun had fallen and everything. This is something the whole town was not told about. So what happened was that they had a meeting afterwards. Like, as I've talked about, this is important, not only the crash, but the history around the Manhattan Project. So, because I've been there so often that I got to talk to people that were involved. And what they said was they explained it as blowing up an ammunition dump.
Right.
Okay, so what was there was the Piedmont scientists. Fermi was there, our Italian scientists, Oppenheimer, Einstein, the Manhattan Project scientists were there. And their headquarters or their rooms were behind the Owl Barn Cafe. So the remnants of those houses are there where they were. And not only that, there were still papers under the bed, which Jose Padilla fished out. Their papers. There were all kinds of mock-ups of cities and so forth. So the whole history of the atomic bomb happened. It's very interesting because that, for me, is the key to all the sightings in the New Mexico area from 1945 right through 1948. You probably know more about the Aztec, the Corona, the Plains of St. Augustine, and so forth. I have those books. I've got to cover them because I've got to compare what happened in 1945. You know, 1 month after the atomic bomb, these two little kids are riding around the property looking for a cow that had calved. And some of these cows were exotic. They came from Spain and so forth because of the ranchers that had brought them over. And what had happened was that they, on the night of August 18th, 1945, Remy Baca and Jose Padilla were in the middle of a thunderstorm. And all this thunderstorm stuff keeps coming up in the research with lightning and thunder, and they heard a bang or a big explosion, very much what they thought. They said, okay, this is the bomb again. But it wasn't. It was a craft that came in, took out a radar tower, and they called it the Fermi Tower, believe it or not. And that tower was there. It could have been a radio tower. I've got to look at the interview. But anyway, took out the tower, and it embedded itself in close to a hill on the property of Padilla. The two little boys walked up to the craft. A piece of the craft had broken off. The older boy, the 9-year-old, heard screeching, like he said, the sounds of dead rabbit. When you go to shoot a rabbit, high level pitch sounds.
Okay.
And the 6-year-old was freaked out because there was mesquite burning all over. And as they're standing 500 feet away from the craft, they see three beings. They call it sashaying back and forth, but they meant floating back and forth. In the case of the younger child, who is now passed on, that's Remy Baca, he said the vision he was given was people falling out of a skyscraper. Now, there were no skyscrapers. There is no television. They had never been to a big city. They don't even know what a UFO is like because they had nothing to compare it with. So we're dealing with 1945. The older child, Remy Baca, who's still alive, wanted to go in and help these beings because he said they were hurt. And the younger one started to cry. The 6-year-old started to cry. So what they did is they ran back to their horses. They went to the ranch and told Jose's father about it, who called Sheriff Eddie Apodaca. Now, the Remy Baca is related to Lonnie Zamora.
Oh.
Apodaca is a common name there, who is involved with the other case also. All of these people are interrelated. They're like, if you talk to Jose Padilla, he's like got all his cousins. They've got cousins all over that were involved in this with the same names. And so what the story was they told the local military, and within 8 days, it took them 8 days, the two little boys are looking over the arroyo. The military comes to Padilla property and says, we're taking out the weather balloon. We have to cut the cattle guard. And if you go today, you'll see not only was the cattle guard cut, a road was made to carry that weather balloon out of there. Okay, so how many times I've been back there 7 times with camera crews. I've taken Jan Harzan there to cover it for MUFON. All the real stuff is there. I mean, it's better than Roswell in a way because we know where it landed, because there is a 30-foot long diameter mark in the dirt that nothing has ever grown. It's different color from the other dirt. So we know exactly where it is. We have the witness who's still alive. And those little boys that were very mischievous were watching the cleanup of the same guys that were involved in the Manhattan Project. They used to come into the Owl Bar and Cafe. They were young guys. And so that's who they got cleaning it up. And these young guys were playing, music. They were playing like country music, and they didn't want to pick up all the pieces. So what they did is make a berm and just with their feet threw the pieces in there.
Wow.
And when they went to clean it up, it took a long time because they had to build the A-frame. Even Jose to this day built what it looked like to put it on the flatbed. The last day they put a tarp over it, and they went to the Owl Barn Cafe. And as you know, and Jose's such a great witness because he's got a photographic memory, and he goes, of course they're going to go there. They've got to take this thing out of there, and they went there to see the women, and it was a place where they could have, ice cream sodas. It was soda parlor. It was the only watering hole in town. It is at the crossroads of the Pan American Highway, but the only way you can know that is if you went and did the field research on this.
Yeah.
Questioned everybody. I questioned the people at the El Bar and Cafe, and they said, well, we thought they were prospectors, these Manhattan Project guys, because it was top secret. They'd walk in with these leather briefcases, and we thought they were either salesmen or prospectors, and they come and buy their groceries and go behind. I mean, this to me is so interesting as a history teacher. And so when this happened, they were watching the whole thing. The craft was put on a flatbed truck, but being two mischievous little boys, the older one, the 9-year-old, jumps on the flatbed truck, goes inside the craft, and he tries to get a souvenir. They called it El Tesoro in Spanish. And he takes a crowbar, goes up to the wall, and actually the pictures, the drawings he made for me, this big piece it's like a handle. It was against the wall, and it was snapped in. And he said he couldn't get it off, so he took a crowbar and just, when he pulled it off, the pin from the inside of the center part of this fell on the ground, and they ran. They took a piece from the inside of the craft. Now, did the military know that? They had taken an inventory? Yes. They had put the piece in the sheep herder's shack under the ground. I've been to the sheep herder's shack. It is now a real relic. It's a ruin. And this story will interest you, because the sheep herder, who didn't know the boys had done that, said that 3 homocitos, little men, came in through the wall looking for the tesoro.
Wow.
There's your paranormal.
Yeah.
There's right there. And when the military said, well, we basically are missing something. Did your boys take anything? The boys go, oh, no, we didn't take anything, and so forth. That remained hidden for some 40 years until Jose Padilla went back, got the piece, and FedExed it to Remy Baca. And so we have a crash. We know where it happened. We know the dates. We know that was part of a month after the atomic bomb. We have even the piece of the inside of the craft, which has now gone to Mexico City. Jaime Maussan got a piece. He's the only journalist that came to cover this for any radio. I mean, it's like nobody's even bothered. So he or radio or TV. So he put it out on Terzo Milenio, and he spent $5,000 analyzing a sample of the piece. The piece has integrated circuits and carbo nanotubes.
Wow. I remember that's the same piece I saw, correct? The piece that was in the back of the TV?
The piece that was in the, where?
When we went to that house where they had, the guy said, do you know where it's hidden? Do you know where I hid it? And then he unscrews the back of that monitor.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've seen the piece. I know which piece you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's been analyzed. Are you going to mention this at Congress? Are you going to have the analysis, or is Jaime going to bring out the analysis of the piece?
I don't think so, because it's not going anywhere. I'm going to talk about other things, but I would like it to be covered in the United States and covered well. It went out on Mexican TV on Terzo Milenio with the analysis of the carbon nanotubes and with the integrated circuits, which is what Colonel Corso talks about in the book The Day After Roswell, with the PCAD, the integrated circuits, and so forth. And the thing is, I have it in my work, in my books. People have read it. I've put it out there. I'm just talking to you about it because I want to go through the timeline of whoever is visiting us is interested in our nuclear capacity.
But who's going to tell the story in the United States? You say you want the story told.
I have told it. I've told it at conferences. I've done entire conferences on the 1945 crash. I've told it to researchers. I brought 7 camera crews there. I don't know what it is about field research, but anymore, I'm very jaded because if it's not an entertainment story, people don't cover it. But let me just finish by saying, when I went down there, down there with James Fox, major,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
director. He gave me the first raw footage. The person that was with James Fox found this piece in the cactus. This piece hasn't been analyzed yet. It does have one of those, what do you call it, snaps.
Yeah.
The main piece from the inside of the craft is in a safe deposit box. It's already, we've cut so many pieces off of that to be analyzed. Here in the United States, comes back plain aluminum. We take it to, but $5,000 wasn't spent on the analysis of it. So the point I'm getting at is I don't know who was in that craft. I don't know what they were doing there. 1 month after the atomic bomb, they never hurt the boys. The boys it changed their lives totally. They've actually gone to some of our best researchers and told their story, and nobody was interested. I'm not going to name names. The only person that was interested is a person I admire greatly, and that's Timothy Good. He's got it in one of his books. And Ryan Wood has it in his crash retrieval book called Magic Eyes Only, the San Antonio crash. So that crash has been covered like the Aztec, and the other Corona and so forth. Somebody should be doing a conglomeration of what happened in that time and why. People always ask me why Roswell. They don't even understand the 509 bomb squadron was housed in Roswell, that it's this historic place, that basically whoever's watching the history of our nuclear development is watching us not only develop things that we're not telling the town, and that they did the experiments, and the results were leukemia, the animals all were sick, the pets were sick, and so forth. They're not talking about the historical impact of 1945, the atomic bomb. They're not talking about that. So mentally, if I'm doing research, I'm going, okay, well, why did the people that visited Adamski, Van Tassel, Orfeo Angelucci, Howard Menger, Eugenio Siracusa in the 1950s and 60s come here? They didn't come here to have coffee with them.
That's right.
The messages were all the same, whether it was George Adamski. And this book is amazing. I think everybody should start reading. This is called We Are Here, Visitors Without Passports. It's written by a French researcher called Michel Zirger, who lives in Tokyo. And I read this and actually saw that they had made an enlargement of Orthon. I knew that Orthon, who landed and talked to Adamski in 1952, they made plaster casts of his shoes. And if you put both shoes together, Glenn Steckling says, and he's the Adamski person, he says it is a formula for free energy. I mean, do people know this? Do they even go back to the 1950s and 60s? There is an enlargement of Orthon's face in this book, but mostly this book is incredible because it not only talks about the spot in Desert Center where Orthon landed, it talks about the message that he gave Adamski to tell the Queen in Europe, I think it was the Queen of Denmark, and go to the Pope Pope John the 23rd, who was waiting for him. It's an anti-nuclear message. And the problem is that this guy does the research, and then he also talks about these human-type aliens walking around in Paris. And he's got drawings of them here. I'm going, okay, well, people from other planets came here in the 1950s and 60s, and what we have to do is go back there, read about it, because they're dead. You can't talk to these people. Orfeo Angelucci, I just read this book, The Secret of the Saucers. He worked for Lockheed Martin in 1952 in Burbank, California. Not only did he work there, he came from New Jersey, where Menger was from. And he said he moved to California because thunderstorms in New Jersey were bothering his head. So he got messages to go to a bridge near the, I think he's called it the Halpernian Bridge. He's got the street in Burbank where he meets with a human type being that he calls Jupiter, who has a spacesuit on, just like Ricardo is doing today, Ricardo Gonzalez. And he's getting a very real message about the future of humanity and what the discovery of the atomic bomb has done to our history. It's a matter of connecting the dots. So what did I do? I took a timeline. I put 1952, Adamski. I put Orfeo Angelucci. I put George Van Tassel, who was there when the being actually came off the ship and walked into George and his family and asked him to create the Integratron, the time machine, the rejuvenation chamber. By the way, the rejuvenation of our cells. That's what Emery talks about. And that is what the message was from Howard Manger, who the space people in High Bridge, New Jersey, gave him fruit to analyze. And I've got not only the pictures of the fruit, but the labs he sent them to, because they said that we didn't keep our blood alkaline. And that's why we had cancer and all these diseases. These are not abduction stories. These are contact stories. And because they're all dead, I can't talk to any of them. So what I do is I have to go back to the source material, the books written about from Adamski. I happen to know Desmond Leslie personally, who wrote the books on Adamski, Orfeo Angelucci, Menger, From Outer Space to You. So when I give a lecture, and that's what I'm going to be doing with Portal to Ascension, and in these different towns, that's what I'm going to be doing in England. I'm going to go, can we go back to the future, please? Because the situation in North Korea is not a fun one right now. And the situation on the timeline might be the same. So they might be coming back. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but let me put it out there. You have to study the history of the whole entire UFO thing to know exactly why these people were coming here, and asking people like Eugenio Siracusa, who saw these space people at the base of Mount Etna. And when I do my presentation, Grant, I have a letter from President Eisenhower to Eugenio Siracusa. I don't know what Eisenhower was doing, talking to an Italian contactee.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
Talking about what we could do to change this timeline. Do I believe the timeline can change? Yeah, I know we can. That's why consciousness is so important. Do we have to go through this? No. You can't. When you study this, you have to come from an informed position, and it's hard for people to read books. But I read the Angelucci book, which is called The Secret of the Saucers, in 3 hours, and I was blown away by the message. He walked out of Lockheed Martin in Burbank. He met Jupiter sitting there. I want to go to the spot because it actually mentions where it was, under the Halpernian Bridge, I think it is. He names the street where it was, and this man is talking to him about these things. He's got it all in here, and I call him spacemen. But it's important because I think what happened, and this is the last, I'll wrap it up. If people want to know more about it, I just did a show for Gaia with Regina Meredith talking about the early contactees, and I also mentioned Val Thor, Stranger in the Pentagon, because I have some photos from the Wendell Stevens archive of Val Thor on the Menger property. That's going to come out the 21st of June on Gaia. I'm going to say, people get a clue. Please study the people that visited us from other planets. And why did they come here? I think in some way we might be related to the populations of other planets that are human, and are hoping we don't repeat the same mistakes. So just wrapping this up, if you want to read a book, read We Are Here, Visitors Without Passports from Michel Zirger. He happens to be French. Who's doing the work is Gerard Arston in the Netherlands, Michel Zirger. I'm doing it, and I kind of consider it Italian. Ricardo Gonzalez, the contactees from that you just interviewed from Latin America, Sisto Paz-Wells. I went to Canada to interview Veronica Paz-Wells, who's Charlie. I had to get what the messages were from the populations of the cosmos. I mean, it isn't even logical to think that God would just create people here. He created them all over these planets. And the only difference between I think, us and them is that they have surpassed their technology and bond it with their spirituality, so that the spirituality, the consciousness, the technology all meshes, and they can travel among the stars and try to reach people like us. That is my conclusion. I don't know if you have any questions, but it's a lot of studying.
Well, maybe we can do I'd like to do a little presentation like this, just on your work with the contactees of the 1950s, to go through the timeline. I can't do it right now, but maybe this evening, are you around this evening we can get Desta and maybe do, like, I'd like to do a lot of things with you. Like, you have so much knowledge of these different things. And just for my people, I'd like to record, like, a lot of the knowledge you have on this stuff, because you're throwing out piles of names that it's just like unbelievable, the amount of knowledge you got. And I think it's important that people know this, because I, as you know, I studied Wilbur Smith, who was an early contactee in the Canadian government, and I have the writings that he did with Adamski, with all these early contactees. So I'm very interested. I know that these guys existed, and that they had a message, and it's the same message. So I certainly would like to do one of all these early, because I know that you've done this research, that you've actually done the work. You've gone to talk to the surviving people. You've gone to the sites of the Integratron and all this kind of stuff. You've done all that. So I'd like to just record it for posterity for me. Can we do that? Maybe.
No, but I can't do it. The problem is this. I'm going on kind of tour with Portal to Ascension, and I'm leaving for Europe, and I'm packing at the same time. So we could do it when I come back on June 24th. But can I just give you one tidbit that you could publish?
Sure.
I took the last surviving contactee of the Giant Rock Group, and Orfeo Angelucci and Adamski and all those guys were part of that. Van Tassel and so forth. I took him there to channel, because the reason why I sat him under the rock, he's in his 80s, his name is Robert Short, to channel the beings, is because in the early days, the beings used to speak to them through crystal radio, Grant.
Yeah.
Until the FBI shut them down. So what the beings asked Robert Short is if they could use his vocal cords.
Yeah.
And the channeling we did in 2014 was called The End of Separation. And I want to send you that channeling written. I'm going to send it to you now, that you could read or show people, because it mentions Vladimir Putin.
Wow.
And I was in shock. I was listening to him talk about Putin in 2014. I said, who cares? I said, we didn't, there's no Putin even on the news. I mean, we never hear about Putin. Why in the world is the voice is coming out of Robert Short, and it was a strange voice that came out of his vocal cords. That's the only way the beings could communicate, because they couldn't use the crystal radio, as they asked permission of contactees. And Robert Short saw a human type being come up to his car, human spaceman. And Robert Short knows a lot about the day the earth stood still, because that was modeled after the early contactees. I don't know if the people know that the Integratron was financed by Howard Hughes.
Yeah, I knew that, yeah.
So the thing is this, that in the early days, 50s and 60s, the truth was out there, like they say in the X-Files, but you should read the channeling that came out of there, because it does mention Putin, and the title of the channeling is called The End of Separation. And I would like to give that to you, and for you to disseminate it so people can make their own decisions.
Have you got the audio and the video, or the audio
and the video and I've given it to Zohar Productions. It is part of my first Laughlin conference, where I brought everybody that did the research, including the film team that did the Giant Rock research. And because I sponsored it, and there is no money for this. Everything comes out of my pocket. I sponsored a 10-man team to go back to Giant Rock to get Robert Short to sit there and for us. And we photographed UFOs over the rock in broad daylight. So what I like, the message is the most important.
Yeah.
The message is the most important. I'd like to give that to you in email, and I would like to ask you to disseminate it to your audience.
Absolutely.
Putin is mentioned, and that shocked me years later, you look at why, you know, we're in 2018 now. I'm going, oh my God, you know, they mentioned Putin. I really believe they were talking to us.
Wow. I would really love that. I would appreciate it. I'll do what I can to get it out far and wide.
Yeah, the other thing, if you want to do it ever, is for us all to go when nobody's there back to Giant Rock, because I think the beings that came in the 1950s and 60s know we care in the United States, because they're going to South America right now.
Yeah.
To go back to Giant Rock and see how we can communicate.
Okay. Beautiful.
Okay. So good luck, and wish me luck in Europe, and we'll do the best we can do as usual.